Oganesson, element 118 on the periodic table, exists for less than a millisecond before decaying, yet esoteric frameworks like Joe Bandel's oak matrix argue this fleeting atom represents the ultimate completion of human soul development. The idea that the 118 elements of the periodic table act as progressive stepping stones for consciousness sounds like a radical departure from conventional chemistry. We are looking at a modern alchemical text where atomic numbers map directly to spiritual awareness, framing hydrogen as a primal womb and the noble gases as stable milestones of spiritual completion.
The oak matrix, specifically Anchor 7, titled The Elemental Ladder, reframes the periodic table from a scientific classification system into a map of esoteric psychology. Bandel draws a parallel between the structural buildup of protons and the structural buildup of human awareness. In this framework, hydrogen sits at the beginning, representing Bina, a concept from the Kabbalistic tree of life, often translated as understanding, or the primal cosmic womb. From there, the addition of subatomic particles mirrors the accretion of mental, emotional, and subconscious density in the human soul.
Equating hydrogen with Bina creates an immediate structural tension. Bina in Kabbalah is the vessel that contains and shapes the infinite spark. Hydrogen is the simplest, most abundant element in the universe, consisting of just one proton and one electron. Framing it as the primal womb of awareness suggests that consciousness begins in a state of ultimate simplicity and potential. But the matrix goes further, dividing the rest of the table into distinct layers of psychological complexity. Lighter elements correspond to simple mental layers, while mid-range elements transition into richer emotional territories.
The categorization relies on the electron shell structure of the atoms. The lighter elements, possessing fewer electrons and simpler orbital shapes, are mapped to what Bandel calls 8 awareness points, reflecting fundamental mental operations. As we move down the periodic table to heavier, mid-range metals and nonmetals, the orbital structures become complex, accommodating more electrons. Bandel maps this mid-range to richer emotional layers, assigning them 18 awareness points. The physical complexity of the atoms serves as a direct analogy for emotional depth and the tangled nature of human feelings.
That structural progression reaches a dense extreme when we look at the outer heavy elements. The oak matrix labels these outer elements as dense primal subconscious layers, attributing 32 awareness points to them. Elements like uranium or plutonium are physically heavy and unstable, prone to radioactive decay. Using them as metaphors for the subconscious implies that our deepest psychological layers are volatile, dense, and perhaps inaccessible without breaking apart the core structure of the mind.
The metaphor holds significant weight when you consider how the subconscious operates in psychoanalytic theory. The heavy elements contain massive nuclei held together by immense strong nuclear forces, constantly threatening to expel energy or fracture. The primal subconscious in human psychology contains suppressed traumas, ancestral instincts, and deep-seated fears that require massive psychic energy to keep contained. When those heavy elements decay, they release radiation. When the subconscious fractures, it releases psychological energy that can disrupt the conscious mind.
Within this volatile progression, the noble gases act as structural anchors. Helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon, and radon have full valence electron shells, making them chemically inert. They do not react easily with other elements. Bandel positions these noble gases as stable milestones of completion at each level of the elemental ladder. They represent moments where the soul achieves equilibrium before moving into the next, more complex phase of development.
Those moments of equilibrium are crucial for any developmental framework. In esoteric traditions, spiritual growth is rarely linear. It operates in cycles of chaos and integration. An individual acquires new experiences or undergoes emotional turmoil, represented by the reactive elements, and eventually must synthesize those experiences into a stable state of being. The noble gases symbolize that synthesis. A person reaches a state of internal inertness, a kind of Zen-like non-reactivity to the external world, having mastered that specific level of the mental, emotional, or subconscious ladder.
Which brings us to the culmination of this ladder, element 118, Oganesson. This is a synthetic element, created in a laboratory by smashing lighter atoms together. It is a noble gas, but its existence is theoretical in terms of bulk properties because it decays in less than a millisecond. Bandel describes Oganesson as the ultimate womb, containing every prior element in eternal solidity within time and space, touching space and time for a millisecond as the present moment of awareness. Positioning a highly unstable synthetic element as the ultimate spiritual milestone creates a paradox.
The paradox is the core of the philosophy. Oganesson represents the bleeding edge of the periodic table, the absolute limit of atomic structure that humanity has observed. Because it contains 118 protons, it encapsulates the entire evolutionary history of the elemental ladder within its nucleus. Bandel frames this comprehensive inclusion as eternal solidity. The fact that it only touches our observable spacetime for a fraction of a millisecond mirrors the mystical concept of the present moment. True, unadulterated awareness of the present is fleeting. It flashes into existence, contains everything that has ever been, and immediately vanishes into the next moment.
This synthesis of quantum mechanics and mysticism reminds me of the early 20th century attempts to unify physics and Eastern philosophy. Thinkers like Fritjof Capra and the Tao of Physics drew similar parallels, but Bandel's mapping is highly specific. Assigning numerical values 8, 18, and 32 awareness points corresponds exactly to the maximum number of electrons that can occupy the different subshells of an atom. The s and p orbitals hold 8, the d orbitals add 10 to make 18, and the f orbitals add 14 to make 32. The Oak matrix takes the literal mathematical rules of quantum chemistry and turns them into a rigid spiritual geography.
Mapping spiritual concepts to scientific structures provides a sense of order to the chaotic nature of inner exploration. The periodic table is humanity's most successful attempt to organize the building blocks of reality. Dmitry Mendeleev created the table based on observed periodic trends before the underlying quantum mechanics were even understood. By attaching soul development to this existing, universally recognized structure, Bandel offers a modern framework for an ancient pursuit. Alchemy was always about refining the self while attempting to refine matter. The elemental ladder abandons the physical transmutation of lead into gold, focusing entirely on the transmutation of the psyche through the lens of modern chemistry.
The danger of such a framework is reductionism. When we force human consciousness into a grid of 118 boxes, we risk ignoring the fluid, unquantifiable nature of the human experience. Chemistry operates on strict laws of thermodynamics and electromagnetism. Human emotions do not follow predictable formulas. An individual might experience the dense, primal subconscious terror of the outer elements while simultaneously operating with the simple, airy logic of the lighter elements. The soul does not necessarily build itself one proton at a time.
Bandel's system might not dictate a strict chronological progression for every individual. It functions more like a map of available states. A person might jump between the rungs of the elemental ladder depending on their life circumstances. The value of the Oak matrix lies in its capacity for visualization. Understanding your current psychological state as a specific type of atomic structure gives you a tool to analyze it. If you are experiencing high volatility and reactivity, you might conceptualize yourself as an alkali metal, searching for a bond to achieve stability. The goal is to eventually reach the non-reactive piece of a noble gas.
Let us examine the concept of Oganesson as the present moment again. Western philosophy often struggles with the concept of the present. St. Augustine argued that the present has no duration. It is merely the razor-thin boundary between the past and the future. If element 118 represents this razor-thin boundary, then the ultimate goal of the Oak matrix is not a permanent state of enlightenment. It is the realization that peak awareness is inherently transient. You cannot hold on to Oganesson, and you cannot hold on to the perfect present moment.
That transience forces a reevaluation of spiritual goals. Many traditions promise an eternal, unchanging state of bliss once a certain level of development is reached. The elemental ladder suggests that the ultimate state is a flash of total comprehension that instantly decays, sending the individual back into the matrix of lighter elements to begin the process again. It is a continuous loop of building complexity, achieving a momentary flash of absolute unity, and returning to the basics. The soul is constantly forming, stabilizing, and breaking apart, much like the life cycle of stars forging these very elements in the cosmos.
The cosmological connection grounds this esoteric theory in physical reality. Every element heavier than hydrogen and helium was forged in the nuclear furnaces of stars or the cataclysmic explosions of supernovae. We are physically composed of this stardust. The oak matrix takes this literal, physical truth and elevates it to a psychological imperative. If our bodies are built from the progressive cooking of elements in stars, our minds must follow the same evolutionary trajectory. We start as basic hydrogen and must withstand immense pressure and heat to forge the heavier, more complex aspects of our character.
The pressure and heat of life's challenges act as the stellar fusion. Without trauma, conflict, and deep emotional engagement, the soul remains in its primal, unformed state. The development of the 18 awareness points in the emotional layers requires interaction with other people, just as chemical bonds require multiple atoms sharing electrons. Isolation keeps you as an unreacted gas. Engagement forces the synthesis of heavier emotional elements. The 32 points of the dense subconscious layer are only reached when an individual confronts the darkest, most difficult aspects of their existence, the psychological equivalent of a dying star collapsing in on itself.
It implies a necessity for suffering and complexity in the pursuit of spiritual growth. You cannot skip straight to the noble gases without passing through the volatile halogens or the reactive transition metals. Every rung on the ladder serves a purpose in building the necessary density for the final realization. This provides a compelling counter-narrative to modern spiritual movements that emphasize toxic positivity or the bypassing of negative emotions. The oak matrix demands that you experience the full weight of the heavy elements.
Bypassing the heavy elements leaves the soul incomplete. If Oganesson is the ultimate womb containing every prior element, you must have integrated all 117 previous stages to fully manifest that final state. You cannot possess the total awareness of element 118 if you have neglected the dense, uncomfortable realities of the heavy metals. The system demands total psychological integration. You must own your simple mental processes, your complex emotional tangles, and your dark subconscious drives. Only by holding all of those simultaneously can you touch space and time for that millisecond of true presence.
We see a continuous thread from the ancient alchemists trying to understand the material world to modern chemists mapping the quantum behaviors of atoms to esoteric thinkers like Bandel synthesizing these fields into a map of human consciousness. The oak matrix uses the language of science to articulate the mysteries of the mind, suggesting that the universe mirrors itself at every scale, from the decay of a synthetic atom to the fleeting nature of human awareness. Share this episode with anyone fascinated by the intersections of modern science, ancient mysticism, and the architecture of the human soul.